Hey
I
everybody,
got
welcome back to
my head
Keeping
in
It
the
Real with
sky.
Tiff and Carl. I'm Carl Raven,
And I'm Tiff Salcido.
and today we wanted to talk to you about the idea of establishing expectations and boundaries for your teams, and effective ways of doing that so that your teams have an understanding of what not only what you expect from
Can we
them,
start?
but
Can we start all over again? Because you were frozen like that whole time.
oh, was I? Oh shit,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. You
All
were like I said, welcome back,
right.
and your face looks crazy. So it might have
Okay.
just been on my side, but just in case, I'm sorry.
I got a crazy face, so all right.
Mhm.
So let me see. We are starting in three, two. Hey, everybody, welcome back to Keeping It Real with Tiff and Carl. I'm Carl Raven.
And I'm Tiff Salcido.
And today we wanted to talk about, our team dynamics, right? We spent a lot of time on leadership, on interpersonal connections with folks. And so also intra-team dynamics with our teams to help them have that understanding of what is expected of them, what is expected of the team performance wise, but also how we treat each other, right? And how we interact with ourselves, other people. And so, just think about that idea of expectations and setting those boundaries of, that are, how we expect to treat each other. What comes to your mind when you think about that, Tiff?
I really think about sometimes the urgency where as helping professionals, we want to help everybody all the time. And we think it's our role to help everybody all of the time. And when our roles get very blurry and we cross over some of those boundaries, or we don't have boundaries at all, um, we it can go a couple directions. Either we help so much that we're actually hurting and creating dependency, or we help so much that we burn ourselves out because we're not seeing any fruit coming from all of our labor, and people either become martyrs, I've given so much and nobody appreciates me, or they're resentful that people are completely dependent on them because they've done everything for everybody for all of the time. And so boundaries to me, and really clarity and role and who's responsible for what is, I think, incredibly crucial, important, and vital to us to be able to have longevity at work, and also making sure that we are not creating dependency. I don't think that people burn out because they don't care enough. I think sometimes they care so much that those boundaries disappear, and it becomes uh, a personal issue where now I'm completely jaded and I won't help anybody.
Yeah. And I think that's something that I don't know, how often you've seen this, but it's just I don't know what that person does, or I don't know if they're working, or
Mhm.
that's not in my job description, or I didn't know we had to do that. Isn't somebody else responsible for that?
Mhm.
And that all that confusion, right? And people look for structure, right? Even folks who are spontaneous and like to chase squirrels like I do, right? At the end of the
Mhm.
day, we still like to know what we're walking into, right? That
Right.
idea of certainty in scarf, right? To be able to know that this is what is expected of me, and just like I've mentioned maybe before, I I don't mind a box. If you're going to give me a box, the parameters, the boundaries, cool. Just let me color within it. But I would like the box. I would like to
Mhm.
know what are the edges of how far can I go, right?
Mhm.
And you know, how far are you expecting me to go, right? So those little things like that. How can I reach that? Leave that to me. That's why I'm here for you to make, to add value. But let me know what to expect. Right. And that's such an important piece when people just say, well, I don't want to babysit people. And they've been here. You've heard this. Oh, well, they've been here 5 years. They should know this already. Right. And, if it's different people have different expectations, right? You work in some offices, the organization I was working with this week, every regional office does things differently, right? They don't all have the same rules and regulations. They have specific guidelines that they're supposed to use to complete their jobs, but people in the same roles in different offices have different expectations and use different tools based off of what their regional director, states. And so when people get together, well, that's not what we do. That's not what we do. And I heard it. Well, we're in this office. I heard somebody say, we're from this office, so we know how to read the regs,
Oh,
which means
oh,
every other office, I mean,
oh,
she's maybe proud of herself, but what about the other region? Some other people like, oh, you heard him say, oh, right? Without
right.
saying anything else. And so it's like, okay, so when we aren't understanding of what our expectations are, we know what we do. I don't know what that other person does. And it creates divisiveness, right? But then
Mm-hmm,
even within
mm-hmm,
our teams, how do we know that we are accomplishing our goals? Or are we just spinning and pushing paper, right?
right,
If I don't know what's expected of me, then I can't even be creative and use my expertise to accomplish it because I don't have a finish line. It's like with goal setting. If you don't have a goal, if you don't have the light at the end of the tunnel, you're not motivated to get stuff done. What are we doing every day? We're just a revolving door,
right.
right? And a lot of the work that we do with folks, who are in helping professions, right? Where either they're serving the community, serving individual clients, or even in government where you're serving the taxpayer, to have that attitude can really cause us to lose our focus on what's important. And I think that's something that you see a lot of. I don't know. How about
Yeah.
you, Tiff?
Well, I agree with you, all of the above. And so setting those expectations or setting those boundaries, it's not about being cold or unavailable. I think when people think about like where do we set the or setting boundaries, like, oh, that feels unhelpful. But really what boundaries do, it helps us be clear and it helps us create a system that's sustainable. Boundaries protect our energy, right? We can focus our energy where it matters. Boundaries also protect roles so we can stay in our lane and do what we're responsible for. And boundaries also protect our relationships with each other because if we're relying on a system to support people, we have to maintain those relationships as well. When we don't have those boundaries, everything becomes urgent, everything becomes emotional, everything feels personal, and that's just not something that we can keep long term. And we know that because we see so many people in this industry who are completely burnt out, people who are caring, compassionate, loving, giving people who just run out of gas,
Yeah.
right? That compassion bank is negative. So I love the GRPI model. Um, I feel like there was a real missed opportunity because it's an acronym, GRPI. I feel like it could have been the GRIP model. Let's get a grip on what we're doing. When we talk about what the GRPI model is, goals, roles, processes, interpersonal relationships, if we can create like clarity in all of these areas, then it helps us maintain those boundaries. But when those boundaries are not clear, this is where those boundaries start to collapse and we have a bunch of chaos. So when I think about goals, I'm thinking about what are we responsible for? What's our vision? What's our purpose? What are the things that we're measuring that are important? And they have to be very purpose driven, right? We're connecting back to it's not just about we got to do 20 tasks a day or complete these 400 objects by the end of the month. I mean, that is part of it, but really connecting to the big picture. Some of the goals that we have are not going to be measurable, or at least something that you can put in a spreadsheet. So really connecting back to kind of that vision, that purpose. What are we responsible for? Roles for me comes down to who owns what, who belongs to the task, who has authority or influence over certain areas. For me, this is kind of like putting the guardrails on what's in your lane. So understanding specifically what's within your power and authority and what belongs to somebody else. Processes is really about how does the work flow? How do we do the work? Who does what by when? What's the appropriate way to handle it? And like you mentioned, Carl, that might look different. Same job may look different in different offices or different areas because you have a different workflow, you have different personnel, you have a different infrastructure. So processes can be very fluid. And interpersonal is really how do we support and communicate with each other in a way that is meaningful and helpful. And so, how do we resolve conflict? How do we communicate information? How do we work as a team? This is important. When I think about the GRPI model, I think of it like a picture frame. And each of these pillars, like the G, the R, the P, and the I, are in a square, and they're upholding like the vision of the work. And so when any one of those pieces is missing, loose, weak, the whole thing collapses. So when we create the goals, the roles, the processes, the interpersonal relationships, if we don't have clarity in those areas in the and the roles are maybe fuzzy, people start to compensate by over functioning in one area or another, and that can lead to, again, stress, burnout, resentment, fatigue, etc.
Yeah, I definitely agree. When I'm thinking of the model, right? And I hear you, you know, having those goals, understanding what we're doing, right? That gives us that vision that helps us to stay on path. If we start to veer off the path, we have that clearly defined goal. It has to be clearly defined, right? It has to be specific. It has to be, hey, you know, this quarter we are going to improve our performance by 30%. And that, you know, and that can be our guiding focus, right? And that's something that if we start to veer off, or if we start, okay, so what's going on? We're not necessarily achieving our goals. We're going forward. Maybe the goal wasn't as defined. You know, talk to me about what it is that you're experiencing. How do we have those conversations? That really helps to identify not just if we're making our numbers or if we're making our performance, expectations, but what is helping us to achieve those performance expectations, or what's helping us to miss those expectations, so that we can refine that and improve it, right? That's the challenge. That's the power of the goal. Also, like I said, the goal, a defined goal, helps us stay motivated. It helps us, say, okay, this is where we're going. These are the milestones that we're hitting as we're achieving them. And as we hit each milestone, to celebrate the fact that we are making progress, right? It's just like when they talk about, I did a generational diversity class this week, and they talk about, how Gen Z likes gamification,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so what is gamification? It's just taking where, an end result that you'd like to get to, right? The end of the map, or, the boss level, or whatever else it is that people, who play video games know. But what about the different stages that are there before you get to, Peach's Castle, right? And so making sure that people recognize, when we reach this stage, this is the first step towards accomplishing this. Okay, we reached another stage, right? And so making it, breaking those big tasks into smaller steps and making them fun to achieve, and that they people feel worthy to achieve them, right? But first, we have to be specific. It's not just about we need to improve performance. What specifically about my performance do I need to improve, right? You want me
Mm-hmm.
to, I want to get in shape. Okay, so what does that mean? What does that mean to be in shape? Right? I want to improve our attendance. What does that mean to improve our attendance? What does it mean to be on time? What does that look like? Right? What are my expectations for that? What are your expectations for that? How can we create that better understanding specifically of what we're trying to achieve? Right? And they have to be clearly communicated to each team member. Right? And then with those processes and procedures, we need to be updated. We need to understand them. If and we need, like we talked about in the last couple um, episodes, we need to feel comfortable enough to walk up to our leader, or a mentor, or a team lead, or just even a colleague, and say, "Hey, so what were we supposed to do here? I know I went to the training you did. Can you just remind me?" As opposed to when that person, oh, you don't remember from that training? Oh, do I have to tell you again? Okay, well, let me hold your hand, or whatever else people say, right? Oh, you didn't remember that? I mean, even just that little bit, for some folks, that's the level of judgment that keeps them from interacting with you, right? So being clear on, am I properly trained in the process and procedures? Do I understand them fully? And do I have a chance to not just practice them in a safe environment, but also to be able to make mistakes when I am out in the live floor, right? It's just like the difference between onboarding and when you get your first caseload, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the rubber hits the road and it's nothing like you remember from onboarding. We didn't train us this in onboarding, right? you know, but it's one of those things. If I know that I'm comfortable with how we do things, which means I'm gonna burn some eggs, right? I'm gonna, or was it burn some water and break some eggs? Is that what it is, right? Or
I
burn
don't
the
know.
toast.
I
Yeah.
don't. I'm not a person who burns eggs, so I don't know.
Sorry. I haven't burned an egg in a long time. They become rubbery every now and then, but yeah. But just, knowing that I feel comfortable getting stuff done on my own because someone else
Yeah.
helped support me get there is so powerful. And then just understanding, our team processes, how we work together, right? How we function, who does what, who's responsible for specific jobs, right? And what your role is, what my role is, how our roles interact, right? How I can support you in your role, how you can support me in my role, and be confident and understanding, well, this person, they've got their feet up. Why do they have their feet up? I'm the one working really hard. Well, they had their role, they supported here, this is what they're doing at this time. This is what you're doing at this time. Maybe you're in the same role. Well, they got this done a little quicker than you. You know, maybe you might want to reach out to them and ask them, hey, how did you get that done so quickly? Or, let's take a look at what are some things that you would like to do to be able to get things done a little quicker so that you can relax towards the end of the day, right? Those type of things that are really important. That communication is so important. Understanding what we're supposed to do and what our responsibilities are and the roles and responsibilities of other people. Because I don't know if you've experienced this, Tiff, but that is definitely a big sticking point with some folks. When folks have tension with each other, one of the things you always hear is they don't work as hard as me. They don't work as hard as
Mhm.
us, or they don't know how to do things like we do. Hey, in
Yeah.
our office, we know how to read regs, right? So
Right.
that is such an important piece. And then that last piece, interpersonal relationships, that's what we talk about on a regular basis, which we talked about in the last couple episodes. How do I create that environment of psychological safety and that environment of being welcome and open for my team to be able to um, welcome, comments on and opportunities for improvement and feedback, right? As much as I
Hmm.
need to give feedback as a leader, if my team is giving me feedback on what they're experiencing and maybe what can be done to put them in a better place to succeed, and I'm open to it, then I'm a better leader for it, and my team's better for it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. You know when I'm listening to you right now, what's coming to my mind, I'm thinking about like the last few years, especially in government. I don't know how it is in private industry, to be honest with you, but what I've heard from so many places is like, oh, we're so short staffed, we're so short staffed. And when people are short staffed or they don't have enough people to do the work, this is where sometimes the roles get really, really fuzzy and we people start putting on multiple hats to be able just to compensate for whatever needs to get done, and that's sometimes necessary, right? This is not to I don't know what the word I'm looking for here is, but this is not to shame anybody. It's
Yeah.
sometimes a necessary evil when the conditions aren't right. What I am noticing though is that people are starting to become more staffed. People are starting to have, again, the ability to have enough people to have sustainable workloads. This is not true everywhere, but I'm starting to see it a little bit more. And so after that period of like chaos where everybody's kind of like all hands on deck, let's get things done. This is a really good time, I think, for many organizations to recalibrate and to say, okay, now that maybe the dust has settled a bit, maybe now that we've gotten some more bodies in the seats and we've gotten people trained and ready to take things on, now we can come back and redesign or recalibrate some of our goals now that we're not in emergency mode. Now we can really identify who does what because it doesn't have to be everybody anymore. We can really think about how we nurture and grow as a group, not just as individuals. And we can really identify some of these processes that need maybe clarity, maybe revision. Maybe we're spending time on things that don't matter anymore. Like how can technology support us to be more efficient and effective? Whatever that looks like. Um, this is not just a diagnostic tool, but it's a planning tool as well. How are we communicating all of these different components and making sure that we stay consistent to these and adapt them as needed? They don't have to, just because you've established goals, roles, processes, and interpersonal relationships doesn't mean that that's going to work forever and always. And so it's, how do we continuously revise and revive these components, but also communicate effectively about them? And so I just have some like things maybe to look for, to know if maybe it's a good time to reestablish. Maybe your boundaries are leaking a bit. So some things to look for is, are you solving problems that aren't yours? So if you regularly feel like you're doing work that belongs to somebody else, this might be a great opportunity to maybe check at some of those roles, or check some of those processes. Or if you are feeling resentful, but you can't say anything, maybe resentment is the way that your body is telling you that the boundaries have been crossed, or there's a leak somewhere that needs to be addressed. And so, how do you use your relationships and your communication to address some of those challenges? Another thing that you may be able to look at, or at least acknowledge, is that if everything feels urgent. So when those boundaries are weak, everything feels like an emergency, even when it isn't. So if you're feeling exhausted and irritated, maybe check your boundaries before you check your attitude. Maybe it's just a real reaction to a system that isn't functioning well. It's kind of like a check engine light, right? So that might be some signs that you need to get a grippy. Get a grippy.
Get it grippy.
Yep.
So just to provide, a tool, if you're wondering how to assess your team's, grippy health, right? There's actually an assessment. If you Google the grippy assessment, and you can, and it's a PDF that actually has radio um, boxes that you can check, right? And it asks 10 questions, right? In each one of the models. I mean, each one of the areas in Grippy, right? And it asks, it just had their statements there, right? So, for purpose, let me show this real quick, just to for people to have a visual on it. If you can see this, this is and just to shout out to our mutual friend and colleague Maggie Guillen, who showed this to me. She works at UCLA, and it's something that really has come in handy for a lot of the partners that I work with, right? But just asking those questions, we understand and agree on our objectives, right? We know who the project stakeholders are, who are affected by this, right? We understand on the scope and definition of what it is that we're supposed to do, the specific tasks that are supposed to be accomplished, right? And then, um, we have specific deliverable times. When is this due? When am I supposed to have it? And what does it look like, right? And build in that time for feedback. And if I turn this in, if something isn't quite right, we want to have that time to be able to make that work, right? So to build in the feedback time. And then with roles and responsibilities, we have those defined and agreed upon roles, right? Authority and autonomy, we're we're clear on the degree of authority and empowerment we have, right? So how far can I go? That's a question you can, that I would ask your leader. How far can I go on this? What is my scope of responsibility? When do I need to come to you for approval, or the idea to move forward? That's clearly defined and understood. That gives me a much better parameter to color within that box, right? What are the critical success factors, the KPIs, the understanding of if we are on the right track, this is what it will look like. What does success, look like? And which allows us to look back and say, okay, we are being successful, but it didn't quite look the way we thought it was. Let's go back and see and review that, right? That we have a game plan, that we have a specific plan of action where people understand their roles, so that we're interactive and we're never questioning what that other person's doing, right? We have effective monitoring process to keep track of that. We have a intranet, or SharePoint or something else like that, where we are, creating those, like a couple of projects I have, we have what's called a task tracker where people are doing what they're supposed to do. And then when we meet together, we report on what's done, right? And then we have operating agreements. How are we going to behave? How are we going to connect with each other? What is the access that we have to each other, right? What is the access we have to the leader, right? And how are we going to interact with each other when we have challenges, right? Or when we have questions that, need to, where a difficult conversation or at least a crucial conversation is warranted, right? And then that we have the right relationship, trust, openness, and participation for healthy, productive teams, right? So these are just 10 questions to ask. And where are we? And you can rate yourself anywhere from 0 to 100%. And then you add up at the bottom, and if you're not at 100% on average, then what's missing? What's the part here that maybe you rated lower? And to give this to your team and to have them fill it out. And if you're not quite sure, that you're worried about their feedback, have them fill it out anonymously, right? And then you can compile that information and come up with a team understanding of where we are, which is a gift. Like you mentioned in the last episode, Tiff, right? That feedback is a
Mhm.
gift. Cy Wakeman was not lying, right? And so, if I feel like we're at 80% efficiency, but the team says we're at 60% efficiency, there's a gap in my expectations or my understanding of where we are. I need to come back to my team. Okay, folks. Well, it says that the average is 60%, but the interpersonal, it seems like we're at 30. What's going on? How are you, what are you guys experiencing? How often are you able to talk to people? Is it something that I needed to make myself more accessible? And being able to promote that healthy conversation with folks can really make a difference. And when we talk about the roles and procedures and the goals, people are accomplishing these goals, roles, and procedures. You always have to remember that, right?
Mhm.
So that's just a tool to use if you want to check the health of your team. And what you talked about, Tiff, do we need to review things? This is a living document. This is something you can give and hand out every month, right? Or, just to see how are we doing, and maybe we can even measure. Hey, it said we were 60% last month. We're feeling like we're at 75 this month, right? And our interpersonal went from 30 to 50. So what's working, right? You can use these not as just data points, but as conversation starters, as prompts to help people create conversation in a non-judgmental way. Because I'm not pointing out things that I'm observing. I'm pointing out things that are in our checklist and expectations, right? And so, and then we can work within those parameters without defensiveness and without any personalization, right?
Yeah. I think this is such a great tool on a really macro level. And again, looking at the the framework as a team as a whole. And I think it's also important for us to think about ourselves individually when it comes to creating some of these boundaries and some of like the understandings, because it's great to have the framework, but when we are continuously like working outside of the framework, there's some things that we can do individually, both from a leadership perspective and maybe a not so leadership perspective, to kind of stay within the lines or stay within the lane of what we're responsible for. And one thing I know that people do really struggle with is how to say no when it's not their job to do. Right. So I want to just say no is a complete sentence. But if we don't want to just say no, like saying no is just not direct a rejection, it's direction as well. And so we might be able to say no in ways that we say, this is not something that I can take on, but here's what I can do. Or I don't have the capacity for that right now. Or this falls outside of my role. I want to make sure that we're being clear about responsibilities. This is where I just say, act your wage and try to stay within what is your responsibility. The last thing for leaders, I want to just be really clear about. Leaders don't just set boundaries, they have to model them publicly. So we have to be able to model the time and the role boundaries both publicly and consistently. And so ways that you might be able to model these boundaries: leaders, don't be sending emails after hours. Don't take over responsibilities that don't belong to you. Try not to reward people who are working themselves to burnout, and make sure people are taking breaks and time off consistently. Because if you are not doing those things, if you're not holding boundaries, then staff is not going to be able to feel safe holding their own boundaries. So we really have to again be conscientious of the culture that we're creating. If we don't, if we say one thing and do another, it's going to be really confusing for people. And again, it's going to diminish some of those the grippy. It's going to diminish some of those parameters that we set. So remember that boundaries don't reduce the care that we have with each other. It really just makes that care sustainable. And so the more that we can create, again, consistent rules, boundaries, and honor those, the easier the work becomes. And again, we can care personally about each other because it protects us as well.
Boundaries are kind, right?
They
So
are.
yeah,
They are. Yep.
yeah. And my last thing, you can't hold somebody accountable for an expectation that you have not already expressed to them.
Right.
That's the quickest
Exactly.
way to that's the quickest way to lose trust.
Yep.
But, all right. Well, any other final tips or pearls of wisdom?
Those are my hot tips. Pay attention to where you are, again, where your boundaries might leaking. Learn how to say no and don't feel bad about it. And again, model those behaviors. You can't expect other people to do things that you're not showing them how to do. So, color within the lines, my friends. Color within the lines. Keep it in the boundaries.
All right. And yeah, if and the models that we show as we go along, I mean, if there's anybody who's interested in like I said, you can find all these resources on the internet, but if there's things that like the grippy checklist or anything else that we have that you're interested in, if you want to put in the comments you know, information, I can put the link into the comments to be able to find those assessments just so you have working knowledge of where to find them. So all right. Well, that wraps up this episode of our show, and really glad to see you all. And until the next time, I'm Carl,
I'm Tiffany.
and let's keep
Let's
it
keep it
real.
real. Yeah,
Let's keep it real grippy. Get a grip.
real grippy. Get a grip.